northern Minnesota, on the shore of Twin Pines Lake, there's a small single-story cabin with a stunning view. The last 2 miles of road are just dirt. In winter they freeze over, and no one passes by after dark. The nearest neighbor is about half a mile away on the map, but a dense wall of spruce trees lies in between. Out here, sound doesn't travel. I came to this cabin to inventory my father's old belongings. Worn hunting gear, broken picture frames, a rusty axe. I also needed to photograph the electrical panel for a contractor. I wasn't here to relax. I had work to do. The sky stayed gray all day. By late afternoon, a heavy fog rolled across the lake. Inside, I stacked wood and lit the fireplace. When I checked my phone, there was no signal, normal for this place. My mother and I had a plan. At exactly 9:30 p.m., I'd send a simple OK text. Even if it didn't go through, she'd check it in the morning. At 8:50, I finished my notes, tested the battery-powered lamp, and locked the doors. The front door had double bolts, the back door only one. 2 of the window locks were loose. I made a note of it. At 9:03, I heard a faint tap on the metal frame of the front window. Just once. Wind, I told myself. 5 minutes later, the same sound came from the back window. I drew the curtains and left the lights on. At 9:29, I sent the OK text. No signal. Tried again. Nothing. Then came a third tap, from the center of the living room window. I dimmed the lamp to cut the glare, hoping to see outside. Beyond the glass, there was only fog and snow. I took a step and the floorboard gave a quiet creak. That's when I noticed it. A horizontal line drawn in steam on the outside of the glass. Not the wind, not snow. Around 9:33, I turned off the stove and picked up my wooden-handled flashlight. As I circled the windows, I spotted a thin, unbroken smear beneath the living room glass, as if someone had rubbed it with a wet cloth. I dimmed the lights further and stayed back from the windows. Out here, standing close to the glass at night just makes you a target. The next tap came from right beneath the living room window. 2 seconds later, another, from the far side of the cabin. It couldn't be the same person. There had to be at least 2 of them. Silence. Then, the faint metallic ring of the front door's threshold. The back door handle jiggled twice, then stopped. Footsteps began to drift slowly along the walls, crunching in the snow. I checked my phone again. Still nothing. If you ever stay somewhere this remote, bring a satellite device. Even without cell service, you can send your location and a call for help. I flicked on the flashlight, aiming it at the glass. The beam caught a face, or rather, a black mask. Glossy glass lenses reflecting the light. They pulled back. The footsteps didn't run. They drifted away, unhurried. From the attic's small window, I could see 2 figures on the lake shore. One tall, one short. They weren't looking at me, just talking. Then the shorter one raised a hand. The taller one nodded, and they both vanished into the mist. But the night wasn't over. For hours I heard faint sounds from every side of the cabin. A shadow passed in front of the kitchen window, then slow steps on the snow, then silence. Around midnight, the front door latch clicked twice. On the third try, the metal gave a sharper clink, like it was about to slide free. I held my breath. In that moment, I knew someone was standing just inches away on the other side. When dawn came, I stepped outside. 3 different sets of footprints circled the cabin. In front of the front door, behind the back door, under the loose window. At each spot, a square patch had been wiped clean as if to mark it. On the back step, someone had left a rusty door hinge. It didn't belong to this cabin. I don't know what they had planned, but I do know this. I will never stay in that cabin alone again. In southern Georgia, where the asphalt ends, a long, winding dirt road begins. After the rain, it turns to dark, sticky mud, deep tire ruts cutting across it like scars. The road snakes through the suffocating stillness of the forest, tree branches arching overhead to form a shadowed tunnel. At the end, there's only one destination, an old farmhouse standing alone in the middle of open land. I moved here last month. It was the only thing left to me after my grandfather passed away, but the inheritance came with something else: silence. The kind of silence that drifts from room to room, settling in your ears like a cold draft. Parts of the house hadn't been touched in years, especially the corner room up near the roof. The door was always locked. My mother had warned me, "Don't open that room. There are old things inside. Let them be." But there had been something in her voice, something she didn't put into words, but it was there in her eyes. The first few days were exhausting but peaceful. I'd come home from work, step onto the porch, and watch the horses grazing in the yard, the deer moving quietly through the distant tree line. That silence felt like medicine to someone escaping the chaos of the city. But when it lingered too long at night, it felt less like peace and more like tension pressing in. Last Friday night started the same way. A light rain began in the late afternoon. The wind swayed the old chain swing on the porch, each swing drawing out a long, muffled creak. I had dinner early, just in case the power went out. A little after 9, a faint creak sounded from upstairs. Old house, I told myself. Nothing unusual. But the sound that followed wasn't normal. Slow, deliberate. The soft rustle of fabric sliding against wood. It had a rhythm to it, almost like footsteps, as if someone was moving around inside that locked room. I froze, listening. The sound stopped. Maybe the furniture shifted, I thought, but I knew. That door was locked. The key was in the kitchen drawer. I waited. The sound didn't return. Still, my mind stayed fixed on that door. I picked up the flashlight and made my way to the stairs. Each step groaned faintly under my weight. At the top of the hallway, the door stood at the far end. Its dark paint had faded with time, fine cracks spiderwebbing along the edges. I stood in front of it. A faint tapping came from inside, like something metal rolling gently across the floor. My hand reached for the knob. Locked. I went back downstairs for the key, then returned. The moment I slid the key into the lock, I heard it, the sound of slow breathing from the other side. Close, right behind the door. I held my breath, straining to hear. The moment I slid the key into the lock, I heard it. The sound of slow breathing from the other side. Close, right behind the door. I held my breath, straining to hear. Yes, someone was in there. I stepped back, and then a thin shadow slid across the gap under the door. My heart pounded hard in my chest. The thought hit me like ice. Someone is here. Just then, a faint creak came from downstairs. The front porch door. It wasn't the wind moving the swing. It was the heavy, deliberate weight of footsteps on wood. I glanced back at the upstairs door. The breathing had stopped, but the knot in my stomach stayed tight. I crept down the stairs. In the dim light of the living room, I saw dark, wet marks on the floor in front of the glass porch door. They looked like footprints. I aimed the flashlight through the glass. No one. But in the far corner of the porch, at the top of the steps leading down to the garden, a motionless silhouette stood in the dark. I aimed the beam straight at it. What I saw wasn't human. Tall, narrow, cloaked in shadow, and where the head should have been, there was only a shapeless void. I switched off the light instinctively. When I turned it back on, the silhouette was gone, but the porch floorboards were still creaking. Then, from upstairs, the sharp clink of metal hitting wood. Something was happening on both sides of me. I stood in the center of the house, frozen. I had to choose, upstairs or outside. But before I could move, the sound from the porch stopped. Silence. And in that silence, footsteps from upstairs, heavy, measured, not like someone stepping out of a locked room, but like they were coming down the hallway toward the stairs. I looked up into the stairwell. In the shadows, a figure appeared at the top steps. Human-sized, its head tilted unnaturally to one side, shoulders slumped forward. At the same moment, the doorknob behind me began to turn. Slowly, click, click. On the third turn, it lifted. Now I knew. There were two threats. One inside, one outside. The footsteps began to descend. The doorknob kept turning. I grabbed the old shotgun from the kitchen, moved into the corner, and waited. But what I expected didn't happen. The steps stopped halfway. The doorknob stilled. And then, everywhere, a deep, suffocating silence. It was so thick, it felt like the house itself was holding its breath. Minutes passed. Nothing moved. When the sun finally rose, I went outside. On the porch, two sets of footprints marked the rain-washed ground. One led down into the garden. The other had never left the porch. And the worst part, that locked room upstairs, it had stayed shut all night. But in the morning, the door was open. After leaving the town center, the asphalt road ends abruptly. Ahead lies a narrow dirt lane running alongside an old railroad, choked with weeds and missing from any modern map. On hot summer days, fine dust drifts into the air. After rain, the gravel between the rails steams with the heavy scent of mud. The line has been abandoned for nearly 20 years, yet at night, the faint, high-pitched clicks of contracting metal still slice through the quiet, like the ghost of trains from another time, tracing a thin line into the dark. The road ends at a single-story house perched on the slope of a small hill. Its front faces the rusted sleepers and tangled grass of the tracks. Its backyard presses up against a dense forest that barely lets in sunlight. I rented the place last month. The silence seemed perfect, exactly what anyone fleeing the suffocating noise of the city might dream of. At least, that's what I thought. The first few days were peaceful. At night, the tracks stretched like two black scars across the horizon. The wind, whispering through the forest, and the occasional click from the rails had a strange, calming effect. Until the third morning. That day, I noticed a pale, powdery mark on the kitchen window's outside sill, a crooked, short line, as if someone had scribbled with chalk. At first, I thought a passing child had done it, but this was the edge of the forest. What child would wander here alone? That afternoon, I stepped outside to wipe it away. I ran my finger across the mark. It looked like dust, but didn't cling to my skin. Not chalk. Dry, faintly gritty, almost like fine metal filings. The moment I rubbed my fingertips together, a chill prickled up my arms. Then I found another one on the living room's side window. This time, the line was longer, ending in a small circle. A sign, maybe a symbol, but of what? And for whom? As the sun dipped low, I walked into the backyard. The soil was damp, and the resinous scent of pine hung thick in the air. Out of the corner of my eye, something moved. In the shadows between the trees, a figure stood still, its body blending with the forest. It wasn't looking at me. It wasn't moving. It appeared to wear a black coat, or so I thought. The more I stared, the less certain I became, because where the head should have been, there was only emptiness. I raised my hand. "Hey!" I called out. No reaction. I blinked once, and it was gone. That night, the sounds from the tracks grew louder. It no longer seemed like cooling metal. It sounded like heavy footsteps moving slowly along the rails. Around midnight, I sat in the kitchen, flipping through the yellowed pages of an old book. The rain had stopped, but the wind still whispered outside. Then, a faint tap from the living room window, like something brushing against the frame. I took my flashlight and crept closer. Outside was nothing but darkness, but when the beam hit the glass, I saw it. Another mark, just like the one from the morning. This one was longer, curved, and ended with a small diagonal slash. At that moment, another tap sounded, this time from the bedroom window. What if they're on every window, I thought. I switched off the flashlight and the kitchen light. The house fell into complete darkness. That's when I heard it, a sound from the tracks. Not the usual metallic click, more like stone dragging across steel. A long, drawn-out shk, and it was coming closer. The floorboards beneath me groaned. A shadow darted past the living room window. I froze, holding my breath. From the side window came the faint scrape of nails on glass. Once, twice, 3 times. I stepped back into the kitchen, hands sliding toward the knife drawer. The sounds outside stopped, but then, inside the house, a soft creak, far above me, in the attic. The noise began as a single step, then another, heavy, deliberate, as if someone were walking on dusty boards. At the same time, that dragging sound came again from the tracks, closer now, almost at the edge of the yard. I stood in the middle of the living room. Overhead, the footsteps were directly above me, but through the window, by the tracks, a tall, thin silhouette stood motionless. Suddenly, the wooden steps of the porch groaned. Impossible. Just moments ago, the silhouette was still at the tracks. My hands trembled as I reached for the shotgun in the kitchen. My breath quickened. The steps above went silent. The porch was quiet too. For a few seconds, I could hear nothing but my own heartbeat. Then, something heavy dragged across the attic floor, slowly, like a sack being pulled along. At the same time, the front door handle turned. Once, twice, on the third try, it lifted. Now I knew there was someone inside and someone outside. I gripped the shotgun and slid into the corner of the room. I waited. Nothing. No steps. No turning handle. Just silence. Thick and suffocating. It was about 3 years ago. That winter, I went to Willow Creek, the village where my family lived. It was a small village. Even the nearest grocery store was about a 40-minute drive away. My family had to go to town for a few days for important business, so I was left alone in the village house. I like solitude. I enjoyed spending time at home by myself. At least until that day. The area where the house was located was completely dark at night. Street lights or passing cars were rarely seen. On the first night I was alone, I didn't encounter any problems. The snowstorm mentioned in the news had started lightly. A thin layer of ice had begun to form on the roofs. The next day, the weather started to get harsh from the early hours of the morning. By evening, my only source of heat was an old stove. I made some coffee and sat by the window. It was so quiet outside that even the crackling of the wood in the stove sounded loud. Around 10 o'clock, I started to hear dogs barking outside. At first, I didn't think much of it. I thought they had seen a wild animal, but then I noticed that the barking had become more intense and warning-like. At that moment, I heard the sound of snow crunching outside the door. Slow and measured footsteps. I decided not to look out the window. When you're alone, you think it's safer not to know. I checked the door latch and put the chain on. By the way, if you live alone, you should have an app that can send your location with a single button in case of an emergency. If you use such apps, don't forget to mention them in the comments. The footsteps stopped, but then I heard a tapping sound coming from the kitchen. It sounded like something was scraping against the windowsill. I took my flashlight and went into the kitchen. I saw a shadow pass in front of the window. Someone bent over, moving slowly. When I shone the flashlight in that direction, I saw a coat covered in snow. I couldn't see their face. It paused for a few seconds, then slowly headed toward the garden gate. A voice inside me said, this wasn't over. When I checked the service door at the back of the house, I saw that the layer of snow under the door had been disturbed. It was as if someone had tried to get through there. At that moment, the dogs started barking again. This time, the barking was getting farther and farther away. In the morning, I noticed that the hinges on the garden gate were loose. Someone had tried to remove the gate and sneak in during the night. Maybe they gave up when the dogs started barking. I still don't know who it was or why they did it. The only thing I knew was that I didn't want to live alone in the village house anymore. After that day, I never lived alone in the village house again.